I'm not asking for your money, he said, his voice low but steady. I just want to help you walk again. The words hung in the air like smoke in a cathedral. Sacrilegious. Impossible. Absurd. Eliza Thorne blinked once. Slowly, her manicured fingers froze around the crystal gin fizz glass she'd been about to sip. The flickering neon light from the 80th floor office window of a Chicago skyscraper caught the diamond studs on her Rolex, reflecting a cold glint across her steel-gray eyes. Across from her, standing just beyond the glass partition that separated her private meeting room from the main lounge, was a man in a worn-out AC repairman's uniform. He held a screwdriver in one hand and wore an expression that was neither pleading nor timid, just sincere. She tilted her head, her lips curling into a slow, disbelieving smile. "You want to do what?" she said. The man stepped forward slightly, the screwdriver now tucked into his pocket. "I want to help you walk again." The soft jazz music from the main lounge outside faded into the background. Even the low hum of the city beyond the glass-paneled walls seemed to vanish. All that remained was the steady pulse of tension between them. Eliza laughed. Not politely, not kindly. She laughed the way only a woman with more power than mercy could. Short, sharp, dismissive. "You're an AC repairman," she said, her words clipped and precise. "Do you offer spinal surgeries with refrigerant and cold air now?" The man didn't flinch. "No. I offer something your doctors haven't." "And what would that be?" she asked, leaning back in her custom wheelchair, elegance wrapped in irony. "AC-based miracles." The corner of his mouth twitched, but he stayed composed. "Perspective," he said. She narrowed her eyes. "You've got 5 seconds to walk out of this room before I call security. I don't care how many air conditioners you've repaired." "Actually, I've only repaired yours," he replied. 3 times a week for the last 6 months. That shut her up. Jake Miller didn't blink. His brown eyes held her gaze calm and relentless. Not invasive, not reverent, just real. "And in those 6 months," he continued, "I've seen more about you than your mirrors will ever admit." Eliza raised her hand toward the call button at the edge of the table. The same button that summoned her private butler. "You've got 3 seconds now. You pretend not to feel your legs," Jake said quietly, before she could press it. "But they move when you're angry. Subtle. Fast. You don't notice, but they move." Eliza's finger froze over the button. He nodded slowly. "Just like just now. When I mentioned walking again, your left foot flinched. Reflexive. Not imaginary. I'm calling someone," she said, her voice low and tight. "I'm not here to blackmail you." "No," she snapped. "You're here to insult me in my own silence. You think because you fix machines and notice something the so-called experts didn't, you get to play prophet? I think because I watched someone I love come back from a place darker than this. I know the way out." His voice softened, "even if you don't want to see it yet." A flicker crossed her face so fast most would have missed it. But Jake saw fear, not of him, not of danger, but of something far more terrifying. Hope. "I don't want your hope," she whispered. "I know," he said gently, "but it's still yours whether you want it or not." Eliza looked away for the first time, her gaze drifting toward the rain-streaked window. Outside, Chicago pulsed as usual, chaotic, fast, indifferent. Inside, everything had stilled. She set her wineglass down with a faint clink. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated. "Jake." She nodded once. "And what exactly do you want in return for this unsolicited generosity?" "Nothing." She laughed again, this time quieter, sadder. "There's always a price." "Not for me," he replied. "I already paid mine." Before she could ask what that meant, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small card, just his name and a number printed in a clean, plain font. He walked forward, stopping just short of her table, and placed it gently beside her untouched dessert plate. "I'll be here until the end of the month. After that, I don't know. But if you ever decide to stop pretending, call me." He turned. "You know, I could have you fired," she said behind him. Jake paused, but didn't look back. "I know. Why would you risk that?" "Because someone once did the same for me," he said, "and it saved my life." And then he walked out, past the velvet curtain, past the butler who looked like he wanted to speak but didn't dare, and disappeared into the quiet hum of the back hallway. Eliza sat still for a long time. She didn't touch the card, but she didn't throw it away either, and when her driver wheeled her back to the car that night, she found her fingers tightening around something in her coat pocket. She hadn't remembered putting it there. The wind whispered through the cracked window of Jake's apartment, carrying with it the scent of late autumn, wet asphalt, distant chimney smoke, and the faint sweetness of roasted peanuts from the street cart below. He leaned against the kitchen counter, cradling a chipped mug of tea as his daughter Lily colored quietly at the table with her socked feet swinging. "You were late tonight," she said without looking up, her voice soft but sure. "Got caught in a conversation," Jake replied, taking a sip. Lily paused, her crayon hovering in midair. "Was it with that lady again?" Jake didn't answer right away. Lily's eyes lifted. She was only 7, but her gaze held something older, wiser. "She's sad," Lily said plainly. "I saw her last week. She looks like she forgot how to smile." Jake smiled faintly. "Some people carry heavy things you can't see, kiddo. Like Mommy." His hand paused on the mug. The warmth no longer reached his fingers. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, like Mommy." 4 years ago, Jake Miller had stood over a hospital bed and watched the woman he loved become a stranger to herself. Sarah had been a battlefield nurse, sharp, fearless, and fiercely alive, until a minor stroke, until the silence that followed, until the day she woke up and said her legs didn't work. And no one could tell her why. The VA doctors ran tests, CTs, MRIs, nothing. "We can't fix what we can't see." But Jake had refused to give up. He learned everything he could, sat with her, watched her, held her when the tremors came. And slowly, inch by inch, she came back. It was messy, raw, full of setbacks. But one day, she walked again, and she went back to her work. She died in Haiti 6 months later. Wrong road, bad breaks, gone in a second. But what she left behind wasn't just a daughter. She left behind a fire in Jake. Quiet but fierce. The conviction that some wounds don't bleed, but they break you all the same. And sometimes, only someone who has been broken knows how to help rebuild. Back in her office on the 80th floor, Eliza Thorne sat in the dark. She hadn't called anyone, hadn't spoken a word since her driver dropped her off. The condo was quiet. It always was. Designed to her specs. Pristine angles, glass walls, automatic everything. No clutter, no distractions, no warmth. She wheeled herself to the full-length mirror in her hallway. Her reflection stared back at her impeccably dressed, posture composed, hair perfect. And yet, she couldn't stop staring at her legs. "Reflexes," she muttered, scoffing. "What does he know?" But something in her chest was twitching. It wasn't anger. Not quite. It was recognition. Because deep down, she knew Jake Miller wasn't wrong. And worse, he'd seen something no one else had dared to say out loud. She had built an empire, fought lawsuits, raised entire industries. But the moment he looked at her, not as a broken woman, but as someone still capable of wholeness, it shook her more than she could explain. "Perspective," he had said. She wheeled backward violently and turned toward her office, the place where she still felt in control, at least on paper. On her desk sat a photo. Leo. God, he had been charming, brilliant, charismatic, and cold as hell. The night of the fall, the so-called accident, he hadn't even driven her to the ER. He'd just called a car service, stayed home, and resumed his dinner with 2 lawyers from the board. 3 days later, he moved out. 2 weeks after that, divorce papers. She remembered the scan results. No spinal injury. The doctors had said, "You should be walking." But she hadn't. Not then. Not since. Not because she couldn't, but because something inside her had simply turned off. 2 days later, Jake was back on shift. He pushed his tool cart across the marble floor of the main dining hall. Earbuds in, but no music playing. He liked the rhythm of the place. Polished chaos behind the curtains, elegance up front. It reminded him of field hospitals, a controlled illusion. He didn't expect to see her again, but just before 9 p.m., the butler pulled him aside. "There's a request," the man said awkwardly. "From the woman in the VIP room. She asked for you." Jake arched an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" The butler looked spooked. "She said if it wasn't you, she'd leave." He wiped his hands, removed the apron, and made his way to the room. Eliza sat at the same table. Same posture. Same air of untouchable elegance. But there was something different in her eyes, softer, more dangerous. "You asked for me," Jake said, keeping a respectful distance. "I have questions." He nodded. "Ask away." She studied him, not like a woman examining a resume, but more like a scientist evaluating an unpredictable chemical. "Did she ever forgive you, Jake?" He blinked. "Who?" "Whoever it was you couldn't save." The words struck deep, but he didn't flinch. "She didn't need to," he said quietly. "She saved herself. I just held the light long enough for her to find the door." Eliza looked away, her jaw tightening. "What happens if I try and I can't?" Jake stepped forward, his voice steady but gentle. "Then we try again. And if I fall, I'll be there. And if I hate you for what you uncover." He smiled, a small, warm, and honest smile. "Then I'll still be there." Silence. And then, for the first time in 5 years, Eliza Thorne whispered the most terrifying words of her life. "Okay, let's begin. You know, for someone who agreed to this, you sure have a lot of rules," Jake said, placing a soft yoga mat in the middle of the sunlit sitting room. "I don't like surprises," Eliza replied flatly from her chair. Arms crossed, eyes sharp. "I'm not a magician, Miss Thorne. Just a man with a screwdriver and a memory." She didn't laugh. She rarely did. But Jake caught the faintest twitch of her lips before she wheeled herself closer to the mat, still fully dressed in her tailored blazer and slacks as if physical therapy were just another boardroom appointment. "First rule," she said. Her tone clipped. "You don't touch me without permission." "Of course." "Second, no pity. I don't do pity. Wouldn't dream of it." "And third," she paused, locking eyes with him. "If I say stop, you stop. Fair." Jake knelt by the mat and unzipped the small duffel he brought with him. Inside were resistance bands, a small hand mirror, a rolled towel, and something she hadn't expected, a notebook worn at the edges. "What's that?" she asked. "My wife's journal," he said, running his thumb across the cover. "She tracked her journey, every doubt, every inch gained. I thought it might remind you that you're not alone in this." Eliza looked at the journal as if it might bite. "She made it through?" "She did." Jake nodded. "And then she died?" Eliza asked softly. Jake looked up. "Yeah, but not in that chair. and not with fear in her heart. That silenced the room. She didn't ask more. Not yet. They began with something simple. "Close your eyes," Jake said. "Just breathe." "I didn't ask for meditation," she muttered. "No," he replied, calm as ever. "But your body forgot what safety feels like. Breathing reminds it." She gave him a long look, but obeyed. The room fell into stillness. Jake watched her watch the tension around her mouth, the twitch beneath her right thumb, the way her toes flexed ever so slightly when the sun hit her knees. There were cracks in the armor. He just had to help her see them. Later that evening, Eliza sat alone in the same room long after Jake had gone. The house felt different, not lighter, not warmer, but less sterile. Like something had shifted, barely, but unmistakably. She wheeled to her study. The walls were lined with books she hadn't touched in years. Contracts, economics, tech manifestos. Everything built to control, to predict. Her eyes drifted to a smaller shelf. Old photos, her father's toolbox, a dusty violin case. She hadn't played since college. Hadn't let music into her life since she traded feeling for empire. Her hand hesitated over the case, then pulled back. Too much. Too soon. Instead, she turned toward her private bar and poured herself half a glass of bourbon. She stared at it for a moment, then pushed it away. "You're changing," she murmured. "God help me." The next session was different. Jake entered the room and noticed something missing: the blazer. Eliza was in a simple white t-shirt and yoga pants. No heels, no armor, just her. He didn't comment, just offered a nod of acknowledgement. They began again. Controlled breathing, light movement, mirror work. "Why the mirror?" she asked. "So you can see yourself healing," he said. "I hate mirrors." "Then maybe that's where we start." They sat in silence a while. Then Eliza broke it. "You want to know what happened?" Jake looked up, surprised. "Only if you want to tell me." She stared at her own reflection, fingers gripping the arms of the wheelchair. "I didn't fall," she said. Jake didn't speak. "I jumped." Silence again. "I didn't want to die," she clarified, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted him to stop looking at me like I was furniture." "Your husband?" She nodded once. "He loved the company, loved the spotlight, but me," her jaw clenched. "I was just background. Beautiful, profitable, replaceable." And after the jump, he didn't even come to the hospital, just sent flowers and a lawyer. Jake's hands rested quietly on his knees. "That's not your shame to carry." She laughed bitterly. "Try telling that to the voice in my head for the past 5 years. He leaned in slightly. "Eliza," he said, his voice low, firm, and tender. "You didn't lose your legs, you surrendered them." Her eyes flared. "And that means you can take them back." Later that night, Eliza sat at her grand piano. She hadn't touched it since the week before the fall. The keys were dusted, clean, but untouched. She stared at them like they might burn her fingers. Then, slowly, she pressed a single note, then another, and another. The sound trembled through the house, echoing down hallways, brushing past marble, glass, and steel. And when she closed her eyes, she didn't see the chair. She saw herself at 19 barefoot, laughing, playing the piano in her college dorm room while her roommate sang off-key beside her. She saw life unfiltered, uncontrolled, alive. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel broken. She just felt unfinished. The park was nearly empty that morning, blanketed in a soft mist that blurred the trees like watercolors. Autumn had begun to scatter its colors across the pathways: burnt orange, golden yellow, and the muted rust of tired leaves ready to let go. Eliza Thorne sat alone near the duck pond, her chair parked under a crooked elm. The cold didn't bother her. She wore it like armor, a thick wool coat, gloves she hadn't needed, and sunglasses, though there was no Sunday. She told her assistant she needed air. She didn't say she was hoping to see him. On the far end of the park, Jake Miller jogged up the hill, Lily bouncing beside him, one hand gripping his hoodie, the other dragging a beat-up doll named Lucy. Lily had begged for a morning walk before school. "Just 10 minutes, Daddy. I want to give Lucy some fresh air." He chuckled. "She's a doll. She's a doll who gets cold feet. That's not how feet work." Lily tilted her head. "You fix people's feelings, but you still don't get dolls." He laughed loud and free. It was that laugh Eliza heard first. She didn't turn. Didn't need to. She recognized that voice now. It had been haunting her sleep since the night he said, "Then we try again." Jake spotted her first. He slowed, not wanting to intrude, but Lily had already dashed forward, Lucy in hand. Eliza looked up just in time to see a little girl standing in front of her, eyes wide and wondering. "I know you," Lily said brightly. Eliza blinked behind her sunglasses. "Do you? You had dinner with Daddy at the fancy place." Eliza arched a brow. "Dinner?" "Well," Lily admitted, "you sat and he cleaned. But I call that dinner." Eliza smirked, despite herself. "She doesn't usually talk to strangers," Jake said, walking up, slightly out of breath. "I think Lucy vouched for you." Lily held up the doll. "She said you look like someone who needs a friend." Eliza studied the doll, its mismatched buttons for eyes, one ear barely hanging on by a thread, and a pink ribbon tied where hair used to be. It was ugly and oddly familiar. "What happened to her?" Eliza asked. Lily looked at Lucy, then shrugged. "She's been through stuff. Why not get a new one?" Lily frowned like the suggestion was offensive. "Because this one knows my secrets." Eliza stared at the child for a long moment, then reached out hesitantly. "May I?" Lily handed Lucy over solemnly. Eliza held the doll in her gloved hands like it was made of glass. "You fixed her," she said quietly, pointing at the sewn ear and the patched-up belly. "I didn't want her to feel left out just 'cause she's broken," Lily said. "Broken things are still people." Jake watched in silence, his chest tightening. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. "Who told you that?" Lily shrugged again. "Mommy used to say it." That hit hard enough to knock the breath from Jake. He hadn't told Lily much about Sarah's illness, only that Mommy had a very sad heart that took time to heal. And apparently, his little girl had listened more than he realized. Eliza gave the doll back gently. "Do you want her to keep you company for a while?" Lily asked. "What? You look like someone who's lonely on the inside." "That's worse than outside lonely." Eliza blinked. The words hit her like wind through cracks in a window, chilling because they were true. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Lily said. "Lucy doesn't talk much either. That's why they get along." Eliza chuckled softly. It felt foreign in her chest. Warm. Alive. Later, after Lily skipped off to feed the ducks, Jake sat on the bench beside Eliza. He didn't say anything at first, just let the quiet settle between them. Finally, she spoke. "She's extraordinary." He nodded. "Takes after her mom. A beat." "I've never been good with kids," Eliza said. "That's because most people forget they used to be one." She looked at him, her eyes narrowing behind the glasses. "You talk like a repairman who swallowed a therapist." He grinned. "I fix more than machines." She shook her head, but a smile tugged at the edge of her mouth. Then she reached into her coat and held up the doll. "Do you know what she said to me?" Eliza asked. "That broken things are still people." Jake nodded. "I haven't felt like a person in years," she added, More like a museum exhibit. Look, but don't touch. Elegant, untouchable, unfeeling, but not unfixable, Jake said gently. She didn't respond. Instead, she looked out across the pond where Lily was now waving at a cluster of ducks. I used to be that girl, Eliza murmured. Curious, loud, brave. Before the headlines, before the stock market, before I let the wrong people define my worth. Jake watched her, silent. What now? She asked. She looked down at the doll again. I'm tired of being untouchable. That night, Eliza placed Lucy the doll on the windowsill of her bedroom. It should have looked ridiculous, a grown woman with a child's plaything. But when she pulled the curtain shut and turned off the lights, something unexpected happened. She didn't feel alone. And in the stillness, she whispered words she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Maybe broken isn't the end. You're sank minute late. Eliza's voice sliced through the morning air like a scalpel. Crisp, controlled, lethal. Jake barely glanced at the wall clock. Traffic. This is a private residence, she replied. Not a bus stop. He dropped his bag beside the mat and looked at her. Eyebrows raised. Would it make you feel better if I apologized? No, she said, folding her arms. It would make me feel better if you respected my time. Jake nodded slowly, then knelt to unroll the mat. Duly noted. So, what's on the agenda today? Sarcasm or stretching? Eliza narrowed her eyes. I'm not here to be mocked. I'm not here to be managed, he said evenly. So maybe let's agree on a middle ground where we both remember why we're doing this. She scoffed. You assume I need reminding? No, he said, looking up at her. I assume you're scared. Her face didn't change, but her fingers twitched just slightly on the armrest of her chair. Let's begin, she said coldly. The first part of the session was quiet. Jake guided her through small motor activations, barely. They're exercises that seemed ridiculous to someone used to commanding rooms and running empires. Flex your toes, he instructed. I am. No, you're trying. Trying and doing are not the same thing. Remind me why I let a repairman insult me 3 times a week. Because I'm the only one in your world who tells you the truth. She glared at him. He smiled, and for a fraction of a second, she smiled back, but the smile didn't last. Later, when he asked her to try shifting forward in the chair just 2 inches, something in her snapped. I said no, she shouted. I told you I can't. Jake sat back on his heels. That's not what your body said yesterday. Eliza turned away, her breath sharp and uneven. Do you know what it feels like? She said bitterly. To want something so badly and have your own body betray you. Yes, Jake replied softly. She turned back toward him, fire in her eyes. Do you? My wife used to scream in her sleep, he said, his voice low. She'd wake up paralyzed, trembling, begging me to tell her it wasn't real. But it was. Every night for almost a year. Eliza's anger flickered, diminished, but not gone. What cured her? Time. Patience. And truth. She stared at him, breathing hard. Then tell me the truth. Jake looked straight at her. You're not broken, he said. You're defending yourself. This paralysis isn't weakness. It's protection. Your mind built a wall so high even you can't see over it anymore. Eliza swallowed hard. So what? You think you're going to tear it down? No, he said. I think you are. She turned her chair sharply, wheeled to the window, and stared out at the trees swaying beyond the glass. Her reflection hovered in the pane upright, composed, untouchable. But inside, she felt like a flickering bulb, one wrong word away from going dark again. I don't want to be pitied, she said, barely audible. You think that's what I feel for you? I don't know, she said. But pity feels a lot like love without respect. Jake stood. Then let's get this straight. I don't pity you. I see you. And if that scares you, it's because no one else ever bothered to. That landed deep, dangerously close to where she'd buried everything she refused to feel. 2 hours later, after Jake had gone, Eliza sat alone in the same room, legs motionless, heart racing. She hated him. She hated that he made her feel seen. She hated that he pushed her harder than her own doctors ever dared. And worst of all, she hated that part of her wanted him to. That night, she had a dream. She was standing on the rooftop of her childhood home in Vermont. The sky was lavender, the wind soft. Her father was there, laughing, handing her a hammer to help fix the old shingles. "You're strong, Tiff," he said in the dream. "You just forgot where you put it." She woke up sweating and crying, and for the first time in years, without knowing exactly why, she whispered into the dark, "Don't give up on me." The next morning, Jake showed up 15 minutes early. Eliza opened the door herself. No assistant, no chauffeur, just her. He raised an eyebrow. "Am I hallucinating? Or did the queen just answer her own door?" "Don't get used to it," she said. But there was a faint smile beneath her defiance. He stepped inside and noticed something else. Her blazer was gone. So were the heels. She wore leggings and a simple cardigan, her hair pulled back in a loose knot. She looked real. "I thought we could try the floor today," she said. He blinked. "You sure?" "No," she said, "but I'm tired of that chair pretending to be my throne." Jake let out a slow breath. "That's the first step," he said, choosing to dethrone the lie. And as she shifted from the chair to the mat, shaky, tense, but determined, Jake reached out to steady her, but she stopped him. "Let me try first," she said. He nodded and stepped back. And for the first time in half a decade, Eliza Thorne moved under her own power. Not far, not fast, but forward. Eliza lay flat on the mat, eyes closed, breath shallow. Jake knelt beside her, calm but watchful. The late morning light filtered through the tall windows of her sitting room, casting soft shadows across the hardwood floor. Outside, the wind rustled the sycamores. Inside, something quieter stirred. "Tell me what you feel," he said gently. "Humiliation," she murmured, her jaw tight. "Physically." She hesitated. "Tension, low back, quads." He nodded. "That's progress," she scoffed. "That's discomfort." "It's proof," he said, his voice steady. "Muscles that don't work don't hold tension." She opened her eyes slowly and looked at the ceiling. "So what are you saying? I've been faking it all these years." "No," Jake said calmly. "I'm saying your mind built a story and your body listened." She turned her head sharply toward him. "You think that's comforting?" "I think it means you're not powerless," he replied. "And that scares you more than the wheelchair." Eliza stared at him, eyes dark. "You don't get to say that." "I do," Jake said, his voice soft but unshakable. "Because I've seen the same fear in my wife's eyes. And I stood right here, too, waiting to be pushed away because healing felt more terrifying than the pain." Silence. "You keep saying she healed," Eliza whispered. "But what if I'm not her?" "You're not," Jake said. "You're you. And you're still here. Which means something inside you still believes this isn't the end." She blinked hard and said nothing. The afternoon passed in tension. Eliza was quieter than usual, sharper when she spoke, slower to respond to cues. "You're pulling away," Jake said as he guided her leg through a light stretch. "What's going on?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her head and looked out the window. "It's nothing." Jake sat back on his heels. "That's a lie." She exhaled through her nose. Fine. I saw a headline this morning. One of the gossip columns. Eliza Thorne's $1 million wheels. Fashion or fantasy? He didn't say anything. She looked at him bitterly. They're mocking me, Jake. Again. Like always, they don't care what I've been through. They just want blood. He leaned forward. Then give them silence, not surrender. She looked away again. They'll never see me as anything but a scandal in heels, she muttered. No, Jake said. They'll see what you show them. And what do I show them, huh? Her voice cracked. That I spent 5 years hiding behind leather and marble and headlines? That I let the world think I was untouchable because I was too ashamed to admit I'd fallen apart? His voice dropped to a whisper. You show them you're not afraid to begin again. Later that evening, Eliza was alone. She sat by the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys, but she didn't play. Instead, she looked at her reflection in the glossy surface, hair slightly unkempt, eyes tired but alive. Something about her posture was different. She'd moved 3 inches on her own today. It wasn't much, but it was something. She lifted her hand and touched her thigh gently, almost in disbelief. She had felt something. The next day, Jake entered to find her already waiting on the mat. No assistant, no makeup, just her. He smiled. You're early. She nodded. I had a nightmare. He paused, setting down his bag. Want to talk about it? I was walking, she said, but no one noticed. Not one person. It was like I had fought so hard to stand, but I was invisible. He sat beside her. What do you think it meant? She didn't hesitate. I'm scared that when I finally walk again, it won't matter, that I'll still feel alone. Jake's voice was gentle. You won't be. How can you be sure? Because the people who see you now, who really see you, aren't looking at your legs. Eliza went quiet, then almost too softly to hear. She said, Thank you. For what? For not looking away. The session that day was different. She pushed harder, more focused, less guarded. When he placed a small towel under her foot and asked her to drag it inward, she clenched her jaw, and the towel moved. Just a little, but it moved. Jake's voice broke the stillness. Do it again. She did. Again. Again. By the 4th time, her breath was shaky, her eyes damp. I didn't think I could, she whispered. I did, he replied. She looked at him. There was something new in her expression, raw and unmasked, like a woman who had just rediscovered a part of herself she thought was dead. I haven't felt my body fight for me in years, she said. It's like it remembered me. He nodded. Because you finally gave it permission. That night, she opened a drawer in her closet and pulled out an old photograph. Her and her father. He was laughing, an arm around her shoulders, a tool belt slung across his waist. She was barefoot, wearing paint-stained overalls and no makeup, smiling like she had the whole world in her hands. She touched the image gently and whispered, I'm still in here. But just as the light began to return, something darker stirred in the background. A message lit up her phone from an unknown number. You think this makes you a hero? You're still a fraud, Eliza. Some things don't deserve second chances. She stared at the message, and suddenly her legs felt heavy again, like chains. Eliza didn't show up for her session. Not the first time in weeks. Not the second either. By the 3rd day, Jake stood in front of her townhouse gate, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes staring up at the tall windows that never blinked anymore. He rang the bell once, then twice. Nothing. Not even the echo of footsteps on the marble floor she once insisted be waxed every Monday. Something was wrong. Not loud wrong, silent wrong, the kind that weighed more than any scream. Inside, Eliza sat in the dark, curtains drawn, phone face down. The screen had lit up a dozen times. Messages from Jake, from her assistant, from a number she didn't recognize but suspected belonged to Lily. She hadn't moved from the couch in 2 days, not since the message. "You think this makes you a hero? You're still a fraud." Whoever sent it had cut straight to the bone. Because it wasn't just hate, it was confirmation of what she'd feared all along, that even at her most honest, she was still a performance piece to someone. A spectacle in a $15,000 chair. A woman who could move but hadn't. A woman who could lead but hadn't led herself anywhere in 5 years. When Jake returned the next day, he didn't ring the bell. He waited, and just before 10 a.m., the front door cracked open. Eliza was in a robe, pale, hollow-eyed, but standing only barely, leaning on the frame, her legs stiff as iron rods, but standing. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice a dry rasp. "Why aren't you on the mat?" he countered. She laughed a bitter, humorless sound. "I got a reminder of who I am. Someone out there knows. They know I'm faking it." "No," Jake said. "They know you're not. That's why they're trying to stop you." He stepped inside and gently pushed the door closed. "The people who sent that message are the ones who are scared. Not of what you can't do, but of what you can." Eliza looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm tired of fighting." "I know," he said softly. "But you've already won the hardest battle, the one against yourself." He reached out his hand, but this time, he didn't wait for her permission. He took her hand gently. "Come on," he said. "Let's finish this." He walked her back to the sitting room, one slow, deliberate step after another. Each step was a battle, a victory. By the time she was on the mat, she was exhausted, but a small spark had returned to her eyes. "What now?" she whispered. "We keep going," he said. "The world can call you whatever they want, but it's your story now. Let's write the ending." And with that, she lay down on the mat, ready for a new beginning. Months passed. The seasons changed from autumn to winter, and a quiet layer of snow blanketed the city. Eliza's townhouse, once a sterile fortress, now felt different. It was filled with the soft sounds of a piano, the occasional thump of a resistance band, and the gentle rhythm of progress. She hadn't thrown away Lucy the doll. It sat on her nightstand, a silent, furry witness to her journey. The gossip columns still wrote about her, but she didn't care. She was too busy. She was walking again. Not perfectly, not yet. There was still a slight tremor, a stiffness that lingered, but she was moving. On a cold winter morning, Jake arrived for their session. He opened the door to find Eliza standing, a faint smile on her face. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, a guitar propped against the wall. "You're standing," he said, a genuine, warm smile spreading across his face. "I am," she said, her voice stronger than before. "I'm standing." He walked over and hugged her gently, carefully. It was the first time they had touched, and it felt like a silent conversation, a culmination of months of work. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected. A knock on the door interrupted them. Eliza's assistant, looking flustered, stepped inside. "Ma'am, the press. They're all outside. They said they're doing a story on the New Thorn Foundation and they want a statement." Eliza looked at Jake, then at the guitar. She shook her head. Not today. She had nothing to prove. Her victory wasn't for the cameras, not for the headlines, not for Leo, or anyone who had ever doubted her. It was for herself. Jake smiled. "You're not afraid anymore." "No," she said. "I'm not. But I want to show them something." She walked to the window, took a deep breath, and opened the curtain. The reporters and photographers gasped. They had come for a story of a woman in a wheelchair, a scandal, a tragedy. Instead, they saw a woman standing tall, unafraid. Eliza lifted her head, her gaze steady. She didn't say a word. Instead, she turned back to her guitar, plucked a string, and then another. And as the sound of music filled the room, she looked at Jake, and he looked back at her. And in that moment, in the warmth of the room, surrounded by the beauty of a song she was rediscovering, she finally knew. She was home.